have to thank our lunch sponsor, Lanka Agro, for that fantastic lunch. Since you're back post-lunch, I'm sure you would like a cup of tea, light tea, or strong coffee. Got to remind you that tea and coffee today will be continuously served in the foyer area. So right to the end of the day, we won't have a specified tea or coffee break, but feel free to pick up your cup of choice and join us in the room as soon as you can. Our tea and coffee sponsor is Yanam Imports. And now for those of you who missed the announcements earlier in the day, while you're in the hall, please ensure mobiles, connected devices are silent. That's statutory. But as I told you earlier, we are streaming live on YouTube, so enjoy yourselves, have fun, look your very best. In case you need to ask any questions, we've upgraded the questioning scenario. You can go to www.slido or slido.com, that's slido.com. Sign in, hashtag Pulses2018, upload your question. It will come on the screen up there and on the monitors so that everybody can have the benefit of the question and the panelist or the speaker will be able to address the question. If you'd like to tweet, remember our Twitter handle is SisilZipTech. Our Instagram address is Global Pulses, and on Facebook, it's SisilZipTech. For those of you who have yet not downloaded the app, please do so. It'll keep you up to date with what's happening right here and all around for this conference. The app is GP Convention. GP Convention, remember to sign in with the email ID that you used to sign in for the conference. And this app is available on both iOS and Android. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's so much for you to do here to keep in touch and, of course, be informed. Talking about information, the next information is really important. It's coming from a specialist in agricultural management who focuses on agricultural production and sustainability. He was a former chair for Protected Harvest, a group that promotes and certifies agricultural production and marketing practices. Of course, you know him now as the executive director for Global Pulse Confederation. He's going to talk to you about an update on the Global Pulse brand and World Pulse Day. Ladies and gentlemen, for this session sponsored by Societa Cofica, please welcome Randy Duckworth.
Our Master of Ceremonies is doing a great job, isn't he? I don't know how many of you have been to the Pulse Conclave before, but he's always there, and we really appreciate having him here today. Just a quick announcement. If anybody finds a cufflink that's only been used once, has a little duck at the end, that's mine, also called a gemelo. Yo lo perdo mi gemelo. Please find me. So this is going to be a little bit different presentation today. I'm not sure that I'm going to get much time to talk about World Pulse Day, but what I really wanted to focus today is on branding of the pulse industry, because I think it's so important. We've had such a great success with the International Year of Pulses that we've got great opportunities in front of us, and we need to really take advantage of those. So the first thing I want to do is make a comparison between two fruits, right? Everybody's familiar with the grapefruit and the avocado. Now, we don't tend to think of an avocado as a fruit, but it is indeed a fruit. So let's look first really quickly. Well, who can tell me, who knows offhand what are some of the benefits of grapefruits? Vitamins, right. Anything else comes to mind? How about fiber? They're good. They have fiber in them, believe it or not. They're good for maintaining your blood sugar. They're actually relatively low on the glycemic index. So these are some of the benefits, right? They help control obesity and diabetes. They've got great vitamins and minerals, good immune system boosters. They help increase your satiety, excellent for managing cholesterol, blah, 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 blah. Some of those look familiar to you. They should, right? great benefits to avocados. Help control obesity and diabetes again, blood sugar, full of micronutrients. They're part of the Mediterranean diet. Great, another great fruit, right? What's happened with avocados in these last period of time? All right, so unfortunately this is just a little bit slow rendition, but this goes over the last 50 years, and you see the growth of the avocado industry over the last 50 years to something that hardly any people ate, right? This end of this chart is amazing to me, right? Just the growth in the avocado industry has been phenomenal, right? So in Europe, for example, you've gone from under 150,000 to over 450,000. In Australia, which is also a producer, both production and consumption of avocados has just gone through the roof. In the United States, it's been even more steep. We hardly used to eat any avocados, about 1 pound per person, and we're now eating 7 pounds, over 7 pounds per person per year, and it's continuing to go up. And here's the funny thing about that is we can't get enough avocados in the United States. They're really expensive, and this is a phenomenon that's true worldwide. Avocado prices, if you buy them, you probably noticed, wow, it's like buying steak. They've gotten pretty expensive, and people haven't stopped buying them, and it takes a long time to get avocado trees into production, and so you actually can't keep up with the curve on the avocado in the avocado industry. And a lot of that has to do with new and different uses of avocados. They're being used in smoothies and shakes, and everybody's eating them on toast, and probably some of the people in Jane's home country have switched from baked beans to having avocado on toast. Now, we can hope not. I don't know for sure, but tremendous new uses in the avocado industry, right? Come on.
Well, we did it. We sealed the bad out and kept the good in. We have everything we ever wanted.
We have all these avocados from Mexico, but where are the chips?
The chips are outside.
The chips are outside!
Wait! Avocados taste great on lots of things. See?
Oh, Wi-Fi's down.
Avocados from Mexico.
That one really made me laugh, but the avocado industry has done a fantastic job. I focus here on avocados from Mexico because the Mexican avocado industry is the biggest exporter of avocados. But the other countries that are producing, there's a World Avocado Council and there's a Haas Avocado Council, and they've done just a fantastic job of promoting the benefits of avocados and doing research into the industry, and I just kind of wanted to highlight that difference because I think one of the key differences between grapefruits and avocados is branding. They're both really, really healthy products, right? The avocado industry has attacked social media. They have really, really promoted their industry and the benefits of their product, while the grapefruit industry has not. And you see the results of that. I think they're both good products. Come on.
Avocado. From Mexico. Delicious. Eat them.
Eat it.
Guacamole. Everyone loves guacamole. For suburban moms. Come and get it, hipsters. See you in the first quarter. Play it.
Avocados from Mexico.
So another avocado commercial, right? And this was actually shown during the Super Bowl in the United States. I'm sure some of you probably watched the Super Bowl, maybe in other places, not here in Sri Lanka, though. I think you only watch cricket. But the avocado industry, again, has done a great job, right? So I want to now talk about pulses, right? So what are some of the benefits of pulses? Well, the benefits of pulses are basically exactly the same as we saw with grapefruits and avocados. They help reduce obesity and diabetes. They have great vitamins and minerals. They're great for reducing your risk of cardiovascular disease, excellent for managing cholesterol. They encourage favorable gut bacteria, great source of micronutrients. They're part of the Mediterranean diet that everybody is talking about these days. They help control blood sugar, and the list goes on and on. Yes, Andrew? And high in protein, you're right. I am missing, and that is a key. I just ran out of room. There's so many benefits of pulses that literally I'd have to go on for about 10 pages. They're a fantastic vegetable source of protein, as everybody in this room knows, right? So we have the option of going the grapefruit route or going the avocado route. And what I would like to propose that we do, and I think a lot of people in this room, is go the avocado route. I would like to promote pulses as a brand, as a program, and the benefits of pulses as an industry so that everybody benefits, so that production goes up, consumption goes up, sales go up, and we don't have to worry about some of these government interventions because we're producing and selling so much product that everybody is happy. Which brings me to the Pulse program. Right? So what is the Pulse program? The Pulse program is the legacy of the International Year of Pulses. It is the way that we are continuing to create a unified global identity and unified messages of the Pulse program about health, nutrition, environmental sustainability, right? Through this program, we want to continue to raise awareness about pulses, about the great headway that we made during the International Year. We want to increase consumption by spreading a unified message, a unified image. This is, again, something that the avocado industry has done a great job of doing. We want to provide messages to the food industry, to consumers. We want to provide messaging to the food manufacturers out there about the benefits of pulses and how them help us spread the message, right? So how many of you saw the Subway ads that included avocados? Anybody? Nobody's familiar with those, but it had a huge, if you've ever been to a Subway where you buy the sub sandwiches, they introduced avocados there, and sales just went through the roof. People loved putting avocados on their sandwich. They charge you 50 cents more. Subway loves it, and it really drove sales. So the food manufacturers, the restaurants, I used to work in the raisin industry. In the raisin industry, sales had been slumping and slumping and slumping despite the good California raisin marketing campaign. And we couldn't figure out a way to turn it around. And then a few years ago, McDonald's introduced oatmeal at their restaurants in the United States, and every bowl of oatmeal came with a package of raisins, right? They didn't care whether you threw it away or you ate it or you put it in your oatmeal or not. And the industry went from unprofitable, very, very hard, difficult industry to a profitable industry overnight, literally because of McDonald's, because it increased people's consumption, just these packets of raisins, by a third in the United States, because people weren't eating raisins anymore. So anyway, the Pulse program, it used to be called the Pulse brand. It's a program, we're calling it the Pulse program now, because it's more than just the brand, okay? So we still have the brand, the Pulse brand, that we want people to use, a unified campaign, making the use of the term pulses universal, right? So you can see down here, I don't seem to have a laser pointer, but our beautiful logo down at the bottom, the Pulses logo. We want everybody to use that, whether you're a packager or an importer or an exporter or food processor. We want everybody to see the Pulses logo on your promotion materials. And we want to educate consumers about the essential elements of why they should increase their own consumption of pulses. And then finally, as part of this program, you know, in the long run, we want to make sure that we produce enough pulses for our consumers out there, right? Come on. So here's some examples of the Pulse brand logo on products, end products. Bonduelle. What's that brand of beans there? Bachelor's, right, from the UK with the Pulse brand. And a few other examples, a bread brand from Canada, and et cetera, et cetera. So we definitely want food manufacturers to use them. If you have a manufactured product, the criteria is actually pretty simple. You can use the Pulse logo on your products, if on your manufactured products, if it contains 5% more of pulses by weight, or the second criteria is if the proportion of the eligible pulse ingredients is within the top 5 ingredients. So it's got to be 5% minimum of weight and within the top 5 ingredients, right? So our ultimate goal with this program is to raise awareness and consumption of pulses. And this initiative was created by our friends in North America. They created the Half Cup Habit. And I think it's a great program where they're encouraging consumers to pledge to consume a minimum of half a cup of pulses every day. And so far there's been 56,000 people that have signed up for the Pulse Pledge, and it was just initiated this past year, in June of 2017. So really a tremendously successful program so far, and it's really trending quite well. Let me just give you a couple highlights of the half a cup day habit. I've got a couple of my friends in Argentina here today. What's the consumption of pulses in Argentina? We're going to put you on the spot. I know all you do is eat beef and drink wine. All right, you don't have to tell me. 300 grams. 300 grams, okay. So for those of us like myself from North America, that's less than a pound of pulses per year. So we've got a lot of room for improvement with a half a cup a day habit. Argentina is a place where we need them to pledge to start consuming half a cup, right? India and Sri Lanka, you're doing great. We still want you to sign the pledge, but you are right on track. So we've got a number of channels that we're using for this program. Social media, of course, the usuals, Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook. We've got online efforts with the media, digital advertising, etc. The 2017 campaign had a total reach of 2 billion people. So that's really incredible. Earned media of 1.7 billion, social media 71.7 million, influencers, really key constituency there, 80 million, and then ambassadors 59 million, right? Excuse me. There were over 400 media stories about the half a cup a day program. And for a program that's in its first year, that's pretty fantastic. Over 1 million visitors to the website, over 3 million page views, a total reach in social media of 72 million, and they've got 174,000 followers, social media followers, which is pretty incredible. Not quite up to Justin Bieber yet, but we're getting there. Some of the other key campaign highlights of the program were, I thought this one was really interesting. 86% of the half a cup a day pledge signers that were surveyed actually used more pulses after signing this pledge. So we made them conscious of it. And 99% of all the people that signed said they planned to eat more pulses after the pledge. So this program is getting people to think about pulses and getting them to actually commit to being healthier and changing their habits. And I think it's just a great program. Here's just a few of the highlights of what the media has said about this program. Just to give you an example, women's health, for an easy 1-2 carbohydrate protein punch, choose pulses, or these are quotes about pulses rather. Prevention magazine, skip the beef or chicken in favor of tacos stuffed with protein and fiber-rich pulses like lentils, beans, or chickpeas. From Pop Sugar, pulses, aka a subgroup of legumes that includes dry beans and lentils, are a must-have pantry staple for cooking on a budget. So pulses, the point of all this right here is pulses are hot. Pulses are still a hot item after the International Year of Pulses, and it's important that we as an industry really step up to the plate and take advantage of it and brand our product in a way that we can continue to grow the market, grow consumption, grow production, right? So the consumers have loved the half a cup challenge. It's really working. And if you're interested in using the half a cup a day challenge, Argentina, contact us please through the Pulse program, and we'll get you set up with all the materials that you need to institute the half a cup a day program in your country, in your language, whatever it is that you want. Okay, so there's some other program services that the Pulse program provides. It's a means by which to connect with the food industry. So you get access to a members-only portal if you join the Pulses program. You get quarterly newsletters. You get customized reports on consumer research. So there's a lot of new consumer research out there on Pulses. There's members-only webinars and market intelligence for various markets. So right now the program is focused on North America, but the more people, North America and Asia, I should say, but it's going to be expanding into other markets, particularly as demand increases. There's also member support in the Pulse program to give you information about health, nutrition, sustainability, consumer needs, right? So you get the access to the latest research and expert support in food product development, health, nutrition, etc. Come on. So one other thing that I think is really a great aspect of the Pulse program is the Pulse Research Database. This is a centralized, published research database that includes the latest research on nutrition, health, environmental sustainability, quality, functionality, processing, and applications. And it took a long time to put this research database together, and it's all there for you to access when you become a member of the program, right? So this just shows you the login. There's also research users in the program that include scientists working for nonprofit organizations, governments, research institutions, academia. And so if you belong to an NGO or a research body and you're interested in participating, please let us know. It's a great way to exchange ideas with other people and get information about pulses. Here are kind of just an overview of the type of members that we've got. We've got associations as members right now. We've got food manufacturers. We've got retailers, food service providers, academia, research funding bodies, industry associations. I know our GPC president, Hussein Arslan, his company, AGT Foods, is a member of the Pulse program. Oops, I got ahead of myself. How do I go back? There we go. So within the database, there's also other access to non-proprietary information about publicly funded research. So if you're interested in finding out about the latest research that's going on right now with pulses, you can access that. There's a lot of projects right now that are listed that are taking place in Canada right now, but we're also interested in hearing more about the programs that you've got, that you're interested in. And in terms of the cost, it's $1,500 per year. You can go to pulses.org/register to sign up, or you can just send me an email at randy@globalpulses.com. The program right now is run through the Pulse Canada office, but you can contact either one of us if you're interested in finding out more about the program. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. If we want to achieve and keep growing as an industry, we have to brand ourselves and promote the benefits of our products. And there are so many benefits to our products. We want to be like avocados and see that kind of a growth curve where no matter what kind of price we're charging, people are still buying our products. And we have the type of products that people, it's so good for them, it's so healthy that really they should be eating a lot more of it than they are right now. So if you join us in becoming part of the Pulse program, we can make that happen together as an industry, right? So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to try and field them. You might need a, no? Just a desert of, everybody's hands are tight on their laps. Any in Spanish?
Coming up.
No. Okay, Argentina, I've been picking on you a lot today, but you guys have got to pick up the slack. One question there.
Hi, Randy. Great presentation. How are we measuring our base case, if you like, in terms of overall demand, and how are we going to measure what success looks like at the end of the program or in the next couple of years? Just as you put up the data on the avocados, how do we know if we're winning in terms of an uptick in the non-traditional demand sectors?
All right. Does anybody want me to translate that from Australian? No. Okay. I think what he said is how are we going to measure our success with this program, and how we're going to do that is through a variety of sources. For example, Nielsen Research is located all over the world, and they're really good at following patterns in the industry. And there's other organizations out there, of course, that we can utilize, but Nielsen has been one. Tim, are you here? I think you and Pulse Canada have used a couple research organizations out there to track changes in consumer behavior and consumption and so forth in North America, correct? That's correct. And I might turn this question over, I'm sorry, but I'm going to put Gordon on the spot here for just a second, if you don't mind, because I think you know more about how the program is actually measuring sorry. He's way over there. Look for the tall guy.
Where is he?
Okay.
Yeah, measuring results is important. So, Peter, you know, we are looking at new product launches. We've done baseline work in terms of inclusion of pulses in pet food, inclusion of pulses, you know, by market, as Randy mentioned, sort of looking at AC Nielsen data. So we are kind of early in the demand curve, and no data source is perfect, but sort of we have done our baseline work so that we can continue to promote and encourage. A lot of the encouragement we're doing, in addition to consumer-directed work, is also focusing on food companies, food processors, and as we incorporate some of these research results on environmental sustainability, human health changes, nutrition, we're hoping to build the case to have companies not only in cereal-based foods, but also lactoproteins or milk proteins, and meat companies also include these products. So it's kind of in addition to creating awareness at the consumer level, we also are creating awareness at the food company level to increase that base of pulse utilization in a range of products.
Thank you, Gordon. That kind of brings me to the next, this question. One big difference, it says, between avocado and pulses is that avocado can be eaten directly while pulses need to be cooked. Do you really think the program will work well? Yes, they need to be cooked, but it's, I think, a bit of an unfair comparison because you're assuming that they're not comparable. I think Mr. Hussein Arslan here has invested a lot of money in North America to make that product ready to eat in a variety of different forms. And there are others here that are producing consumer-ready products. So I can walk into a grocery store in the United States, for example, and buy Benito's chips. I can buy ready hummus. And that's how most of the consumption is being done these days. So most people aren't putting it on the tabletop, at least where I'm from, are putting it on the stove and cooking it anymore. They're eating it at quick serve restaurants, QSRs, Taco Bell. They're feeding it to their dog through pet food. They're, like I said, eating it through chips or snacks or whatever. So we have to be prepared to meet the needs of those changing consumers as we move forward in the different ways that they want to consume their food. So I have a 26-year-old son who doesn't cook. So for him, it better be on the supermarket shelf, and he's not going to do anything more than throw it in the microwave. But I think we're there. I will say this in closing. Personally, I think we are at where the soybean industry was at 30 or 40 years ago. We are just on the cusp of discovering all the incredible things that you can do with pulses. It's just amazing. I've been to a couple research centers on pulses. I've tried a custard made from pea starch, egg replacers. We're just starting, and you're going to see so much more, and that's why the industry needs to get behind it, needs to get behind the brand so we can all benefit. We can sell more, we can produce more, and as I said, hopefully avoid some of these problems with government interventions because it's going to be such an important crop. I appreciate your time. I'm out of time. Thank you very much. Enjoy the conference. I'm glad you're all here.
That was the Executive Director, Global Pulse Confederation, Randy Duckworth, giving us an update on Global Pulse brand. This session was sponsored by Societa Cofica. I'd like to remind you that the continuously rolling tea and coffee in the foyer area is sponsored by Yanam Imports. Our next session is on contract performance, answers to difficult questions. Our panel of experts on GPC and GAFTA will provide interpretation of GPC Contract 1 and GAFTA 126 arbitration rules. I'd like to welcome the panel on stage, Andrew Jacobs, Jane Chisom-Kont, and Hussein Arslan.
Can we have the pointer, please? If you can pull the presentation up, please. So good afternoon, everybody. This session, difficult questions on contract performance. We reached out before the convention and asked for some tough questions on contract performance so we could go through with you how the interpretation would be under GPC contract number 1, as well as at GAFTA arbitration. So during this presentation, we'll be covering changes in import or export duties, taxes and levies, shipping or quality irregularities, GAFTA arbitration process and its enforceability, and what GPC can do in disciplinary actions against defaulters. I'd like to thank Jane Chisholm-Gaunt, the Director General of GAFTA, for joining our panel. And we'll start off with the first question, which I will ask Hussein to address. Is it force majeure if the importer's government changes or introduces duties, taxes or levies? And this could equally well apply if the exporter's government changed duties, taxes or levies. So, Hussein.
Yeah, reply is very simple. You know what is the reply? Sorry? Yes or no? Reply, you know the reply means you know the reply yes, or the answer is no? Okay, the answer is, as you can expect, is no, because in GAFTA contract, clause number 13, it is clearly states, you can read from the behind, and this is actually is taken from the GAFTA contract, which is our industry is using it. So this kind of changes is not affecting this reply. The answer is no. Of course, always that provided both parties agree, they are at liberty to explicitly change any standard condition. So the GPC contract number 1, we always say, as in case of the GAFTA, it's a template contract, which means it's a format that having the conditions. So any conditions that you don't like, if you think that you are exporting to Sri Lanka and new government is going to change it, you can say that, okay, this is my condition. If your seller accepts, of course, this can be managed between the buyer and seller.
I would also invite Jane to comment on GAFTA's experience with claims of force majeure.
It's quite common for people to advance claims of force majeure within GAFTA arbitration. Picking up on what Hussein said, I think it's important to see the difference between changes in import or export duties and actual prohibition of export. In terms of being able to rely on a claim of force majeure under a GAFTA contract, you need to be able to prove prevention of shipment and prevention of delivery. And this is where most claims tend to struggle. It's often possible to identify something that can be force majeure, but has it actually prevented you from performing the contract? And certainly within the last 4 years that I've been at GAFTA, I'm not aware of any successful claims for force majeure.
Thank you, Jane.
In addition to that, as Jane also underlined, and she said one thing, exporting countries impose of duty. We are very much concentrated on the import duties, but there are sometimes countries that imposing the export duty, like in Russia, they imposed an export duty on sunflower, and this happened in several times in the past in some countries. So these are also, so as we always explain, we have to be even-handed. The export imposement, also import imposement of tax or levies are clearly mentioned in the contracts.
Thank you. So what right does a buyer have if they've contracted basis shipped quality and they're disappointed by the arrival quality. If the seller provides a quality certificate which is independent, then the buyer has no contractual right of regrading. However, both GPC and GAFTA in GAFTA 88 realize that it's often impossible for inspectors to get to plants which are sometimes many thousands of kilometers from the port of loading. And where a certificate is based on a submitted sample, or where the certificate of quality doesn't tie up with the goods that are shipped, then the buyers do have the right of regrading. They have to follow Clause 5, lines 30 to 39, which, as you can see on the screen, says, buyers have the option to instruct their representatives to draw and seal delivery samples within 3 business days of unstuffing of the container for the purposes of regrading and/or analysis. And the seller's representative has the right to be in attendance at the sampling. So in such a case, both buyers and sellers in GPC contract number 1 agree to accept the result of regrading or analysis. So Hussein, would you take this next one? What right does the seller have to claim extension of shipment, for example, if the shipping line fails to load their cargo on time?
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, before coming to this, I think we should explain about this quality certificate and being independent. I think this is here, we are a bit different than GAFTA contract, because here we independent means in Canada's shippers, they are delivering the sample of their own. GPC contract is not taking this as an independent, so I underline this, unless otherwise stated in your contract. So from the seller side, you better emphasize this point. Seller should bring independent certificate. They cannot make their own sample to be tested. That doesn't make it independent. So I want to underline this point very well. Is it clear enough?
That's fine.
Andrew. So if we go to the extension, this is also a bit different, slightly different than the GAFTA contract. You know, as per our contract, we have 8 days granted while we are taken from the shipper's sample submitted. We consider it as independent, but we also introduced 8 days free period that shipper, or let's say exporter, seller can ask it, or it is in the contract, it is stated. So after that 8 days, they have to ask extra days with certain discounts, as stated also in GAFTA contract. So our contracts, whatever the irrespective of the shipment period, GPC contract allows 8 days. Why we do this? Because the shippers are loading from the origins, and then it travels at least 5,000, let's say, take this example of Canada, it's traveling 5,000 kilometers. And they are not sure their container is loaded or not on the vessel. Sometimes shipping line is informing very late after when they pass the shipping period. So we wanted to be fair on this, so we added this clause. Thank you.
So when is a notice of shipment out of time, and when is a notice of shipment invalid? So again, we're referring to GPC contract number 1, clause 11, and a notice of shipment has to be passed within 5 days of the bill of lading date. And if there is a string of subsequent sellers, then it's required to pass on the notice on the same day as the person in the string receives the notice. And if you receive the notice after 4 o'clock, then it can be the next business day. And importantly, a notice that is passed to an intervening broker is considered as a notice served on the buyer. And a notice of shipment is invalid if it is out of time, i.e. passed late, or the bill of lading date is outside the contract period. And another important thing to bear in mind is that once you've given a notice of shipment, you can't withdraw it and replace it unless the buyer's consent. So your first passing of the notice of shipment had better be accurate. Otherwise, the buyer, if they consider it invalid, can refuse to allow you to retender. So what are the relevant obligations of buyers and sellers if the shipping documents are delayed and not presented by the time the vessel arrives? It's the responsibility of the seller to get the documents in time, but sometimes they're inevitably delayed. And in those cases, the seller needs to hold the buyer harmless from any justified extra charges that arise due to the late presentation. But to be even-handed, the buyers also have an obligation to mitigate extra charges. So if the buyers can arrange to land and clear cargo by providing bank indemnities acceptable to either the shipping lines or the authorities, then such reasonably incurred costs should be refunded by the sellers.
So this is not a reason for default? Is this a reason for the buyer to not to execute the contract?
No, the buyers are obliged to take up the documents. If their goods are shipped on time, it becomes a question of how do you deal with the extra expenses. Jane, would you like to add anything on that in terms of GAFTA's interpretation?
In terms of reasonable expenses, as long as you can show that they have justifiably flown from the breach, then you should be able to recover those.
But you agree it's not a reason to refuse documents if the documents turned up late?
No.
So it is an excuse for extra charges?
Justifiable extra charges should be refunded. It's the seller's responsibility to get documents in time. If the documents are presented after the vessel has arrived, they're normally referred to as stale documents.
Okay.
So must sellers insure cargo for 102% or 110% of invoice value? GPC contract follows GAFTA contracts that the seller should provide insurance for not less than 2% over the invoice value. But it's become very common for buyers to request 110% of invoice value, and as long as that is agreed between buyers and sellers prior to shipment, then that can be incorporated in the contract. Where should an insurance claim be payable? Well, best practice is that the claim should be payable in the country of the shipment of discharge. It is important that the insurance certificate be expressed in the currency of the contract, and it's the seller's responsibility to insure with a first-class insurance company which accepts domicile in the UK in case of legal proceedings. It is not, however, the seller's responsibility to guarantee the solvency of the insurance company, and that is meant to be addressed by the choice of what we consider to be first-class underwriters. Jane, have you got any experience of how first-class underwriters are established?
Usually it's one, as you say, that has a domicile in England to actually receive documents. There isn't a standard definition.
Okay, thank you. If the seller's insurance certificate contains a deductible, is that acceptable to be tendered? Well, we go back to the previous definition that the certificate should be for not less than 2% above the invoice amount. And so a policy with a deductible is not strictly tenderable. However, buyers would be well advised to seek agreement with the sellers that they hold them harmless. And so if there's a deductible of, say, $500 or $1,000 from the claim, that the buyer should say to the seller, you will be responsible if there is an insurance claim to make good the deductible. Because the benefit of having a deductible goes to the seller by means of a reduced premium. So it's only reasonable that the seller should make good any deductible. What's the difference between arbitrating using GAFTA rules 125, on which GAFTA 88 was based, and on rules 126 on the basis of GPC contract number 1? Jane, would you take this one, please?
Sure. There's a number of differences between using GAFTA 125 and GAFTA 126. GAFTA 125 is a two-tier dispute resolution process, whereas 126 is only one stage. Using Rule 125, each party has the ability to nominate an arbitrator, and then GAFTA appoints the third to become the chair. It's important to remember that although you can nominate an arbitrator, this isn't your arbitrator. They don't act for you. Once you have appointed them, they then become part of a neutral panel of 3. With Rule 126, there is only one arbitrator appointed, and this arbitrator is appointed by GAFTA. Should, however, either party be unhappy with the arbitrator that's selected, either under 125 or 126, there is the ability to appeal to GAFTA to have the nomination reconsidered. In terms of the awards that are actually produced, under Rule 125, you'll get a fully reasoned award, and then you can actually appeal again under GAFTA. And average costs and prices, so average cost for Rule 125 for the production of an award is about 9 months, and the average fee is about $12,500. Under Rule 126, it generally takes about 3 months because it's a short one-stage process. And again, the average fee is about $7,700. I should also say that because of the fact that people tend to explicitly contract under 125 or 126, if we do get arbitration claims that come in under 125, and they're obviously for a very small quantity of goods, we will write to both parties and invite them to consider whether they want to use 126 instead.
Thank you. Jane, I'd also ask you to pick this one up. If there are a series of contracts between two parties and one party defaults, does it allow the other party to suspend performance of the other open contracts?
No, it doesn't. And this is because under English law, the contracts are considered to stand on their own. So defaulting under one contract doesn't give you the right to automatically cancel the other contracts. What we do, though, is allow people to potentially consolidate awards if they have several contracts that they have a dispute with. And also, when we revised the 125 rules recently, we made it more explicit that the arbitrators also have the power to consolidate hearings as well if they feel that it's in the best interests.
And are GAFTA awards of arbitration enforceable?
Yes. GAFTA awards of arbitration are enforceable. In the vast majority of cases, when you're handed down a GAFTA award, the other party pays it. They might not be very happy, but they will pay it. If the party doesn't pay it, then GAFTA will actually write to the defaulting party and encourage them to pay up. If they don't, then we will place them on what's called the GAFTA defaulters list, and we will notify all GAFTA members that this particular party has not complied with an award of arbitration. And that's generally fairly effective at preventing people from, failing to uphold their awards. And every year we get several people who've been on the GAFTA defaulters list who pay up. The other way that GAFTA awards are enforceable is in the local courts under the UN Convention, what's called the New York Convention on the Enforcement of Foreign Arbitral Awards. There is a list of countries who are signatory to those awards, and so if you take your GAFTA award to the local court that's local to the defaulting party, you can ask them to actually enforce the award.
Although you've covered part of this, I'd like you to take us through on a step-by-step basis what a claimant should do to recover their losses.
Document them, I think, is probably one of the most important things. And to remember that losses which flow directly and consequently from a breach can generally be recovered, but you will need to evidence them. There is also a duty to mitigate, so you can't, for example, decide not to take any reasonable steps and simply allow a demurrage claim to escalate or goods to continue to take up storage room and increasing costs. So as long as you take reasonable steps and you can document it, you can present these costs to the arbitrators, and then they will consider those and make an award to actually include those costs as well.
Could you run through the step-by-step as per the slides of from having a dispute going through the arbitration process?
Well, first of all, you've got to apply for GAFTA arbitration, which means you've got to make your claim within the time limit, which is generally 1 year. You've then got to submit to GAFTA a fully documented claim showing the terms on which your contract was concluded, whether this is GPC contract number 1 under GAFTA 126 or perhaps GAFTA 88 under 125. You'll need to pay a deposit for arbitration fees at this particular point. We'll then notify the claimants and they will need to settle any fees over and above the deposit for the award to actually be released to both parties. Very often, the total cost of a GAFTA arbitration is actually less than the deposit. So in those cases, we will actually refund any fees and give you the arbitration award. GAFTA's arbitration awards are confidential. They are only shared between GAFTA and the parties. We do not even share them widely with arbitrators for training purposes, so they are a confidential document. The respondent will be, as I mentioned before, will be asked to actually settle the claim, and if they don't, this is when the GAFTA defaulter process will actually take place.
I think another point to mention is that interest costs are generally recoverable, but legal fees are generally not recoverable.
That's correct, unless the parties have agreed otherwise, which is not generally the case. And I think another thing that's also worth bearing in mind is that loss of profit on a subsale contract is generally not recoverable unless there are particular circumstances, such as the other party being aware of the importance of the subsale at the time the contract was entered into.
Okay, now to Hussein. What disciplinary actions can we at GPC take to help recover losses from a defaulting party?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. First of all, when this result came out, what we do, our committee approaches to the party for the payment of the award. If they don't make the payment of the award, and then what we do, the committee will inform our GPC executives committee. So what we are going to do in executive committee, we have a chance to make a disciplinary action. What kind of disciplinary actions we are taking? First of all, they are going to be barred entering any GPC events. And GPC has more free hand than GAFTA. We can publicly announce these companies to our members and all our associated national associations. And all these members are going to be, all these people are going to be banned any event of the associated members, like Pulse Canada and whatever our associate members are. So they will not be able to enter into any of the events and functions of these organizations. And furthermore, I think what we did is that at Executive Committee, we are also taking seriously that if a buyer or seller repeatedly doing these things, even if forms a different company, we will bar this company from entering any functions and event of GPC and our associated members.
Thank you. We are running short of time, and I wanted to give opportunities for questions. I don't know if we've got any coming up through the app.
We have questions on board. The one most like is 3. Can you read it, or if you want, I can read it to you.
Yeah, I can read it. So on the first question about analysis, which doesn't comply with the standards of the importing countries, it's important that the buyer, when they are establishing the contract, puts in the contract specifications that they want. It is not reasonable to put on the seller to know what are the requirements of the importing country. So if there was a dispute and it came to arbitration, the arbitrators would look at the specifications agreed between the two parties and require that rules as to what is right or wrong. There is not an assumption that a seller can be aware of all of the regulations in the importing country. Jane, would you like to comment on that?
No, I was waiting for the other.
Okay. Okay. Jane will do one of the other questions. Which one?
It disappeared. You replied, it has disappeared.
Looking at, I think there's probably 3 that relate to GAFTA. If, first one, if the buyer defaults goods on port, when we start the claim, how long will it take to get any solution? Well, if you're using 126, you will generally get an award within 3 months of making the claim. If you're using GAFTA 125, it's generally going to be about 9 months. And again, it's incumbent on you to try and mitigate your losses as far as you can, but any reasonable losses associated with the default, which are caused by the defaulting party, will be taken account of in arbitration.
So, I mean, here is the timeline. What the question wants is actually, you will find you have to sell it somewhere else, or you leave on the dock because it is not sold. Even if you sell somewhere else, you can prove that it is default.
Yes.
So after certainly you feel that it is default happened, then you can start GAFTA process.
The second one, the average cost to apply, sorry, it's gone again. Sorry, the average cost for us to apply to GAFTA for a claim. When you initially claim arbitration with GAFTA, you don't actually have to pay anything at all. And it's advisable for you to do so as soon as possible to protect your position and to make sure that you're within the time limit for the claim, which is generally 1 year. It's only when the proceedings, you're ready to actually take those proceedings forward and sort of issue your formal claim that we will ask for a deposit. I mentioned before that 125 costs on average about $7,700. The average cost for a GAFTA 125 claim is about $12,500.
Regarding the question of when must the seller request an extension of shipment, it's covered in GPC contract number 1 under clause 6, which I'll read. It says, sellers shall serve notice claiming extension not later than the next business day following the last day of the originally stipulated period. So let's try and simplify that. If you had sold May shipment, then latest 1st of June, you would need to apply for an extension of shipment period if you required it.
The next one around, does the claimant have to be a GAFTA member to claim arbitration? No, they don't. And we regularly get arbitrations that feature both parties as non-GAFTA members. If, however, you are a non-member, you'll have to pay a non-member's fee, so it will cost you more. Something else to actually bear in mind, it's very rare for a GAFTA member to default on an award of arbitration. And a little bit like some of the disciplinary regulations that Hussein was referring to, one of the options that we have at GAFTA is to actually terminate the membership of somebody if they do default on an award of arbitration. So in terms of your sort of know your counterparty pre-contracting advice, you would be well advised to look to see whether the other party is a GAFTA member or not.
Again, trying to get some quick answers in on the question about a shipment advice needs to be tendered within 5 days of bill of lading date. Do we mean shipped on board or just the BL issue date? Decision was made with GPC contract number 1 that it would always be based on board bill of lading date, although if both parties agreed, they could still use receive for shipment bill of lading dates when the cargo is handed over to the container consortia, but without agreement otherwise, it would be the on-board bill of lading date. Now, the sign is showing out of time. We've got more questions. Are we out of time? Where's our Master of Ceremonies? Are we out of time? Okay, so we'll have to leave it there, but we'll be able to respond to the questions that were raised separately. So if there are other burning questions you've got, come and seek out Jane or Hussein or myself.
Yeah, I want to reply one question here because I don't know who wrote it. Half is in Turkish, half is in English. It says hükümet reddederse. Who wrote this? He was very... Anyway, thank you. This is no different than, this clause is no different than the reply we gave at the beginning, that government restrictions or government problem is your problem. It's not seller problem. Okay, we have time.
So let's try and get some more answers. Mostly defaulters are non-GPC members. During application for GPC membership, you better ask to bring letter from their local trade association. Hussein, do you want to comment on that?
I don't know what the question wants to say. He wants to make, this anonymous friend wants to give a message on between the line, but I don't understand the message. Mostly defaulters are non-GPC members. Is it? I don't know. During application for GPC membership, you better ask to bring letter from their local trade association. Like from Turkey, if they have incorporated, they have always, they have to register with the government, like Exporters Union. So they can bring, any company can bring a letter from that. And maybe in India, if IPGA doesn't give the letter, but I don't know. This is good to think about it.
Yeah, I agree. It's something that we haven't yet faced up to, but I would like to suggest that if there was a new member of GPC and you had an unsatisfied award of arbitration that hadn't been settled, if you notify the GPC Contracts Committee, then we would take that to the executive, and we're looking for people as members of GPC to treat others as they themselves would be treated. So if there is an unsatisfied award of arbitration, I would imagine the GPC executive would like to involve itself in trying to resolve that situation or rescind membership?
Yeah, we will.
But we're making up policy as we go along.
Yeah, there is one. Which question you take?
I was just going to say something about the quality certificate. So you've got a quality certificate from an independent surveyor, hopefully a GAFTA-approved one, and then your cargo arrives and it's damaged. It doesn't match the certificate. What can you do? Well, I'm going to make the assumption that you've shipped on certificate final, which tends to be the majority of cases these days. In this case, it's unlikely that you could challenge the certificate final, but you'd probably want to do some tests to try and find out what kind of water damage it was. Was it, fresh water? Could it have been that the hatches were left open during loading? Is it salt water? Is it damage that could have occurred during the journey? And so you'd probably then be looking to make some sort of either an insurance claim or a claim against the carrier.
Yeah, I mean, here we should add one thing, Andrew, that the definitions, we have definition problem in our industry. So to overcome this, we are talking to the Canadian government and their bodies about to have the same language on same definition. The question that here is reflecting the definition differences between different origins. So it is one of our tasks as a Global Pulse Confederation to talk all these government people and to bring into a standard definitions, at least the meaning of the word and definition of the word, we should be talking of same thing. Otherwise, there is going to happen a chaos, and it happened a chaos a year ago from the shipments from Canada. Like for Canadian standard doesn't show wrinkle, practically you can load 100% wrinkle and get US Canadian #1 certificate. And this wasn't fair. We raised this our objection in Canada, in Vancouver. They formed a committee, and this committee, I tell you, still working because last week they approached me. On Tuesday, we will have conference call with these people to sort it out from the Canadian side.
Moving on to the question about if one of the parties is unwilling to participate in the process of dispute resolution, what happens? GAFTA principles have been that both the claimant and the respondent have an opportunity to put forward their case. But if one party refuses to participate, then the arbitrators will proceed on the basis of the facts that are in front of them. So if there is a default, a market-inspired default, and the buyer just ignores the whole process, the arbitration can still proceed. Jane, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I mean, this does happen from time to time, and in those cases, GAFTA will actually appoint an arbitrator to act to represent the party that isn't participating, so that we would still have the panel of 3 or the sole arbitrator in the case of 126. But it doesn't affect the validity of the process. Even if the other party takes no part within the process, you will still end up with a GAFTA award that can be enforced.
On the question of do we have to engage lawyers at high costs to prepare an arbitration claim, the answer to that is definitely not. We should try to avoid bringing lawyers into this process. The idea behind arbitration is you've got trade specialists, not lawyers, who act as arbitrators, and that you should state your case simply, concisely, and clearly. My strong advice would be to avoid going to lawyers. In fact, under GAFTA contract number 126, it stipulates that the presentation of a claim should not be done by an advocate, a legal professional, because the concept is that it's the trade experts who will help resolve this. We only go to a court of law to try and enforce payment of an arbitration award if the other party declines to settle. Jane, would you like to add something on that? Okay.
There was a couple of questions. One around how do you apply to GAFTA to claim arbitration? And in order to start arbitration, it's a very simple procedure. You need to first of all serve notice on your counterparty, and that can be simply by email, that you intend to claim arbitration at GAFTA. Again, the second step is you then contact GAFTA's arbitration department, again, usually by email, saying that you want to claim arbitration. And at that point, as I said before, you don't actually have to pay any money, and you've secured the opportunity to then decide how to progress with your claim, or potentially even negotiate with your counterparty for the year's time limit. So counterparty first, then GAFTA. The second one, the seller liable to pay any justifiable claim, is market loss in buyer classified as a justifiable claim. As I mentioned before, in general, you cannot claim loss of profit on a subsale within GAFTA arbitration unless there are very specific circumstances. And that generally means that your counterparty, your buyer, knew that you were absolutely reliant on this sale, perhaps in order to perform some other kind of contract. But you would need to be able to evidence this. But as a general rule, no.
I'd like to pick up on that. The concept would be if there was a default and the buyer didn't take up the documents, then the seller has to prove what the market value is for those goods in that position at the time. So, for example, if you had bought something old crop at old crop price levels, and new crop, which would be shipment 2 or 3 months later, were at lower levels, if there was a default, the seller would have to look at what the market price for the goods is in the location where the goods are at the time, and it wouldn't be acceptable to arbitrators to come up with a price for goods that wouldn't be available for 3 months further. I'd like to pick up on the question about documentary delay due to bank fault. The banks have got a responsibility to turn documents around in a reasonable time, and then it depends whose bank has made the delay. If the bank is the buyer's bank, that the buyer said, please present the documents to me through bank ABC, therefore they are the buyer's bank, then it would be up to the buyer to recover any extra demurrage because of the bank's failure to process the documents speedily. If it was the seller's bank, that the seller has chosen the bank to present the documents, then it would be up to the seller to approach the bank to make good demurrage charges because they hadn't processed the documents with all due haste. Okay, on the question of a letter of credit extension, what can be done to force an amendment to the letter of credit with the suitable 8-day extension? Effectively, there is nothing the seller or GAFTA or GPC can do if the LC is not extended. But it would nevertheless be a default by the buyer, because if they'd agreed to trade on the basis of GPC contract number 1, which allows 8 days extension, if they don't effectively make that extension available by extending the LC, they will be in default. And a way to get around that would be to build in those extra potential 8 days in the shipment period when the LC is first open. So if you sold June shipment, you should look for shipment up to the 8th of July to be tenderable under the letter of credit with a suitable expiry date.
There were a couple of questions about GAFTA and other countries. The first one was around what about countries who don't know anything about GAFTA, don't have an agreement with them, what can you do? Well, we're always very keen to hear about countries where you think GAFTA should go, to run seminars, to run courses, to raise awareness of GAFTA and how it works. We don't have specific agreements with countries, but I think the point that was made before about checking whether or not your counterparty is in a country which has signed up to the New York Convention is really important. Because if you contract with somebody who's based in a country that has not signed up to the New York Convention on the enforcement of foreign arbitral awards, in the event of a default, you may find it hard to actually enforce that award. The second question was around GAFTA's offices around the world. We're headquartered in London, but we also have offices in Geneva, Kiev, Beijing, and Singapore, and members in 90 countries around the world. And we do try to travel as much as we can to have the opportunity to meet with members and non-members. In terms of arbitration, if it were to go to an oral hearing, and remember 125 and most 126 cases will be dealt with on documents only, in other words by email, so there'll be no requirement to travel. It's generally only at appeals under 125 where there's an oral hearing, and although most of them do take place in London, the reality is they can happen anywhere in the world as long as both parties agree. And one of the things at GAFTA that we're trying to do, particularly with running our training courses all around the world, is to encourage more, particularly younger people, to train to become arbitrators in different parts of the world so that we are able to offer more locally based arbitration.
The question with 4 likes, where is reanalysis to be done? In the country of shipment or the country of arrival? Generally, if you're talking about reanalysis or regrading, it would mean that both buyers and sellers have jointly drawn samples of the delivered cargo, and then they would be resubmitted to whoever issued the original certificate of quality. If the contract referred to a grade, for example, US grade number 1 or Canadian grade number 1, then it would need to go back to the relevant authority in USA or Canada to do the regrading. It wouldn't be possible, let's say for a European buyer, to do the analysis of a sample to say whether it's US number 1 or Canada number 1. That would have to be done in origin. Do either of you want to add anything on that?
In the case of a default in arbitration, what is the role stroke liability of a broker? Well, obviously, it depends.
Moment, please.
Sorry.
Because the president of Sri Lanka is coming, I have to get and take him here. So you continue without me. Actually, you don't need me here anyway. But the questions was perfect. So I am leaving, and I will come hopefully with the president of Sri Lanka.
That's great. Thank you, Hussein.
Thank you.
So just briefly to return to the role and liability of the broker, it depends on what the nature of the default and arbitration case is. If it is, for example, regarding whether notice was validly served and notice was actually served on the broker, then that is good notice. So actually the broker may well be involved. However, there may well be arbitration disputes that actually have nothing to do with the role of the broker.
Also, I'd like to add that the broker has actually fulfilled their service by introducing the buyer and the seller and agreeing the terms of the contract, and their brokerage is payable whether or not the contract is fulfilled. I received a question, do we have to pay the brokerage before we ourselves have been paid? The answer to that strictly is that the brokerage needs to be paid, as I said, whether the contract is fulfilled or unfulfilled. Personally, during my career in the industry, I've waited until the buyer's paid me before I settle a broker's commission. But I'm probably stepping a little bit over the mark. We're out of time. Thank you very much for your interest, and thank you to Jane for lending us your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you once again for taking us right through a very complicated procedure. Just to remind you that the President of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, Maithripala Sirisena, is with us in the hall, and in case you plan to be in the foyer area, request you to come back into the hall because you'll have to leave that foyer. It'll clear for him to pass through and enter here. So while we probably wait for that, just got to remind you that we don't have a specified tea and coffee break. It's a rolling tea and coffee. I would like to thank Yanam Imports for the rolling tea and coffee. We had quite a complicated section just now to get details and procedures and, of course, the terminology with the GAFTA Contract 126 arbitration and GPC Contract 1. We'd like to thank the DG GAFTA. Thank you, ma'am. The co-chair GPC Contracts Committee. Thank you, sir. And of course, the president of GPC, Mr. Cesar Slan. We'll now move on to the next session, which is Global Green Lentils Outlook. And we might have to briefly interrupt the session to welcome the president of Sri Lanka. But right now, we will continue on schedule. And I'd like to request on the panel, we have with us the personnel, they're already ready. Please welcome the president and CEO of Simpson Seeds Canada, operating out of Moose Jaw, Canada, Saskatchewan. They have about 4 processing plants, exporting pulse crops and canary seeds to over 70 countries. Mr. Greg Simpson. Thank you, sir. Next, representing a company that has facilities in Canada, India, Australia, China, Jordan, and USA. He brings to the dais a wealth of experience to focus in his position right now, which is Senior Vice President, Seaboard Special Crops. Please welcome Bradford. A quality supplier of pulses to the food industry, operating out of Germany and Canada. Please welcome Managing Director, Shilta and Mark Gamba Baha, Michael Kemperdink. And to complete the panel with about 30 years of industry experience with all aspects of international trading, please welcome Senior Vice President, Columbia Grain, Ron Williams. With that, I hand you over to the panel. Ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon. How do you like that? I just touched my computer and turned it off. So anyways, I'll just take a second here to reload. And anyways, good afternoon. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to address you here in Sri Lanka. I've been coming to Sri Lanka since 2001, and it's been quite an impressive transformation of a country over the last 18 years. To see the expansion in the industry and the dull processing, and to see the expansion going on out here in the port with the development of an island, some $15 billion of investment, and then this wonderful hotel. It's been quite incredible. Just get my presentation back up and running. My power is back. So as you see, there's our opening slide. Our company is involved in processing in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and so it's a family-run operation. that has been exporting to 85 countries worldwide. This year marks our 39th year. I'll just move on, and one of our whole objectives here is we're talking about the theme earlier this morning. It's really about nourishing the world. That's what we're all here to do, and it's just a privilege for us to be part of that global process of feeding the world. On today's outline, we're going to be discussing Canadian green lentil production, followed by U.S. green lentil production. Later on in my presentation, first ever shot at throwing up some numbers for Russia-Kazakhstan green lentil production. We'll also talk about the weather and other market influencers. I also want to mention that compared to being at the GPC last year in July when I participated in this panel, is quite a different scenario because we were able to, at that point in time, we knew what where we were in terms of planting. May is the normal planting time for green lentils in North America and in the Northern Hemisphere. Here we are in May, and we haven't even hardly started seeding, so it's quite a challenge. Plus, there's been some changes, as you know, with the other origins playing a big part in the supply-demand balance. And then we'll also talk about some other market influencers as well. So I'll start, first of all, on the Canadian scene. This slide here shows the intended seeded acreage according to a recent seeding report that was released by Stats Canada just a couple weeks ago. So this is an updated slide to show that the large green bar there is the large green, or typically known as a layered type lentil planting. And seeding of large greens is going to be up a little bit this year. This is largely due to the fact that large green lentils are at a premium to reds. And also lentils are a pretty efficient crop when it comes to moisture utilization. So farmers like the rotation, of course. The price is at a slight premium to red lentils, so it's a little bit more profitable. And so it's no surprise to see that the planting went up from 975,000 to an estimated 992,000 acres. I think it's really important to point out that these numbers are in flux. Even as farmers go to the fields, they may have done this study 6 or 8 weeks ago, but farmers are changing their minds on the go. So these are not cast in stone at all. Did I not click that? Sorry. Sorry about that. My clicker wasn't working. So there's the outline that I talked about earlier, and there's the bars. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'll let you study that. You can see the trends there for the large green bar showing the slight increase of layered lentils. Then the purple line is medium greens. It's really no surprise for most of the world. People are importing that the larger green is the most preferred size, and the regular size richly typed lentil has been not as popular in Canada. But we are seeing a slight increase in demand of the richlies from 28,000 to 41,000 acres. And then the blue bar is the small green or Eston type lentil. We're seeing a slight decline in the Estons. Okay, so there's the yields are basically on about a 5-year average yield. So again, this is a really big guess at this juncture to think in terms of what we'd be producing for these different classes of green lentils in Canada. If we have near normal rain, we should be able to increase production from 503,000 metric tons to 566,000 tons of large green. The richly from 15,000 to some 21,000 tons, and the small greens, which are represented in the blue, from 194,000, we see a decline to 183,000 tons. So essentially with normal rain, as you can see, the red line represents the overall green production. With normal rains, we should see a rebound in total supply. We have had a very unusual weather pattern occurring as well that's notable. On the Easter long weekend, which was in March this year, we had a record minus 29 below in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. It was the coldest on record. So that means it goes back to the 1890s that we had such a cold period. We still had snow on the ground at the very last days of April. On my farm, the robins came back and the snow was still on the front lawn. And then within about 2 days, the weather just completely shifted from winter right into summer. Seemed like we had no spring this year. And suddenly the snow disappeared, and farmers were rapidly trying to go from frozen cold snow to warmer weather to get their machinery ready for the field. So also with this condition, the planting is a little later. So with a slightly later planting, this does mean that there's risk of flowering during the hottest part of the summer in July. So this is another factor to be watching in terms of what the yields will be for the crop. Germination is a critical issue right now. I did call home yesterday to see how things are going. Farmers who are ready to go are rapidly trying to plant while the moisture remains. But in other parts of the lentil production area, the moisture conditions are in dire condition, and in some cases, some farmers may be having to wait for rain before they can plant. So here's the exports. We expect with better supply that our exports will continue to increase. I have a couple reasons for that. I do think the Canadian dollar being weaker right now, we're right around 129 today, trading Canadian to US dollar, so that gives the Canadian production a currency advantage in terms of reflecting our costs internationally. Also, because we had good quality this year, we were regaining lost production that we lost to other origins because of the quality problems we had in 2016. So I think it's another important factor. We should probably be talking about pet food here a bit, because in North America, the amount of lentils and chickpeas and peas that are going into pet food is unprecedented and is becoming a major driver in the market. So we do have alternatives other than the traditional markets. Okay, so there's our top lentil importers for Canadian. And you can see the impact that India had, the large green bar there. When India had 2 failed monsoons in 14-15, of course, pigeon pea prices went to unprecedented prices, like $1,800 a ton, and layered lentils were going in there as a substitute. So we had a record demand of 200,000 tons, and this is what drove demand for green lentils, not only in Canada, but also the United States and Russia, Kazakhstan. We were joking that almost if you could plant them in your garden, you could make money on growing green lentils. So then you can see the rapid decline of India as an importer, as overproduction globally and good weather in all producing countries, including India, had a big impact on the demand for green lentils. Algeria is a big importer. They've been steady as an importer of Canadian, but they also buy US and more recently, more from Russia, Kazakhstan, as their production has been increasing. Morocco and Mexico are good, steady consumers of the Eston small green lentil. They prefer a #1 quality. Turkey, they've been reducing their imports, again, because of the influence of Russia, Kazakhstan as a supplier. So these are our top 5 that I've brought to everybody to see there, and we'll see whether that actually happens. I also want to point out that last year's production in Canada was probably one of the best quality years we had in history. I can count on my hand 5 times over the last 40 years where we had 95% of our production was a number 2 or better quality. Quite often we only produce about 35% as a number 1, and so I think it's important that everybody here who's looking to Canada and as a supplier of green lentils, that probability of having 95% in the top 2 grades is pretty rare. So just touching on the U.S. side here for a moment. This is a recent USDA report that just came out. You can see that the biggest acreage reduction is expected in Montana, down 220,000 acres. North Dakota down 90,000 acres. In the blue, you can see those are early estimates. Where they expect a rebound in production to reach 411,000 tons, despite the drop in acres. So of this tonnage, we'd expect about 21% or 72,000 tons bigger than last year's crop due to recovery in yields. Once again, the caveat is what will the moisture conditions be like, and we'll be discussing that a little later on. So in 2017, the Richley production was about 291,000 tons from 746,000 acres. So again, we're just projecting 2018 numbers, but we'd expect that to be up somewhat. And these are just the notes I just went over there, but in 2018, at the bottom there, you can see with good moisture, we could be potentially up to 350,000 tons of richly type lentil. There'd be some layered mixed in there and some estins as well, but that would be just a real rough estimate. So let's just drill in a little bit on the moisture map for Saskatchewan. So in the red, you can see there where I've drilled in on the majority of the production area, which is in Saskatchewan, parts of Alberta on the eastern side of Alberta. And as it stands right now, the moisture conditions are better in the west than they are as you go east. They get worse. So you can see the darker brown spots there. That starts right around Moose Jaw and east. It's pretty darn dry there. As I mentioned yesterday, I phoned and talked to my son to see how things were in the field, and he was saying that in Moose Jaw, when he was driving over the fields, you could still see cracks in the ground. We have a heavy clay soil that when it's dry, tends to crack and open up because it expands and contracts with moisture. And so that gives you an idea just how dry it is when you have cracks in the ground in the spring, it's very dry. So Moose Jaw and east is in pretty rough shape. Prognostications are very inaccurate. Nobody really knows, but at the moment we have a neutral, I would say between an El Nino and La Nina, we're in a neutral phase right now. So at the moment we could move in any direction, but largely a high pressure system has been setting up over the United States and Canada and has been blocking the moisture that would normally flow in the spring. From the forecasts I've been seeing, we have probably a 75 to 85% chance that our moisture or rains this year will be below normal. So when you look at the moisture conditions here in the subsoil, you can already predict that chances are we're not going to even grow an average crop this year. So our top 5-6 inches has enough moisture to plant, but the profile that we grow a crop on is 4 feet. And so if you take a probe and push it in the ground, you'll find that the probe will only go down a few inches, and and the probe stops because it hits the hard, dry ground. So we are definitely in need of moisture. Here's a moisture map of the United States. The big red area I think is important to point out. That's the where the winter wheat growing area of the United States is, and it's been a driver in terms of wheat markets. So why would I mention that? Well, farmers will use other commodities to compete for planted acres, and right now I'm pretty sure they're considering whether wheat wouldn't be a better option to growing pulses, as the prices have been declining since these intentions were printed. We've seen further bid declines to growers, which is continuing to tell them not to produce lentils. So we could see further reduction in the actual plantings if given these lack of incentive to grow lentils. Anyways, drilling in on the on this particular diagram, you have to go to the northern part of this of the U.S. here to point out where Montana and North Dakota is. It's right in the center, just above that red area. I did have it marked out, but somehow I lost my mark. But anyways, if you go right up to that red dot at the top of Montana on the eastern side, that area is very dry. I think that the U.S. lentil production area is going to be equally challenged in terms of obtaining a good crop this year. I want to move on to a chart. Marlena Borst provided me this slide, and it's about as good of a guess as we could come up with. Like I said, this is the first GPC convention where we've been able to come up with a slide. Certainly, I'm sure there's people here who could maybe more accurately describe what's going on over in Russia and Kazakhstan. From what I'm understanding, the farms are very large. It's not unusual for a farm production base here to be 350,000 hectares, which is huge. We always knew that there was Russian-Kazakhstan competition to compete with. 8,000-10,000 tons of green lentils would be a normal short-term competitor in the past years, but this last year a notable shift took place, and now we're seeing where there's probably, in this slide, we're throwing 70,000 to 80,000 tons of green lentils. You know what? It could be 150,000 tons for all I know. Unfortunately, I don't have those details. There's no statistics that I could get my hands on, but maybe somebody else here could fill in the blanks. But I do think that... Oh, sorry about that. I'm running 2 slide presentations side by side here, so I'll let you study that. So you can see where Russia and Kazakhstan have been producing for many years at a small rate. And that's a stunning graph depicting the sudden increase in production in the Russian-Kazakhstan area, and I believe it's more in Kazakhstan. I do think that they have some challenges, though, in terms of what they can produce for quality on a year-by-year basis, so we'll see what happens this next year. They also have very expensive costs of producing or transporting product to the Port of Mersin, and trucking costs, I understand, are $120, $150 a ton. So when you work that back to an FOB farm, I think it's likely more profitable for people in that region to produce wheat than it would be to produce lentils. So my expectation is that the signal is to back off on green and red lentil production in Russia, Kazakhstan. A John Deere combine is going to cost just as much in Kazakhstan to buy as it does in Canada or Montana or North Dakota. So I expect the same signals would have an impact on them. So other influencers, we do want to talk about India. As you know, the duty, 33%, is definitely a barrier. The increase in production of all pulses inside of India and the lack of their demand has definitely impacted demand. Penalties for fumigation are also an issue. So this is a problem. We could also talk about other countries, Algeria changing their policies. So you have to be a packager or canner to import. You have to put 120% of your cash up front to be able to buy. Iran has its own issues. As you know, there's a pending decision coming up here on May the 12th about sanctions for Iran. Their currency has been devalued, and it's difficult for traders to obtain US dollars. And then finally, yeah, this last slide, yeah. And finally, I wanted to just talk to you about things that we can be doing. And I was pretty proud of my daughter, Elise, and she's been doing some food cooking classes at her house. So every week she's been having 4 or 5 people coming in. So she has been doing her part about the half a cup consumption habit. So anyways, with that, I'll end my part of the presentation, and I want to pass it over now to panelists here. And Brad, I just want to maybe start with you, and maybe you could make some comments about how you see things from your perspective.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Simpson, for that presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to, we will continue with this presentation after a brief interlude. His Excellency, the President of Sri Lanka, will be joining us in about a minute. So we could either stop halfway or we could step off and come back after he. It's your choice. I think it's easier to step off and, come back. Yeah. So we will continue with this panel. Time stops, please. Can we freeze the time, please? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I request you to please be seated and stay away from the doors or the movement area, because the President's entourage will just be rushing through, and we don't want that you should in any way be affected by that. So please stay clear of the doors and the movement areas. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, it's indeed a singular honor to have His Excellency grace this occasion. He is in the venue and has been there for about half an hour. He was just about getting ready to enter the hall. So, thank you once again for your patience. And very especially, please stay away from the movement areas and doors. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency Maithripala Sirisena, President of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, is in the hall. It's now my privilege to request the President of Global Pulse Confederation, Mr. Hussein Arsalan, to do the formal welcome.
His Excellency of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, Maithripala Sirisena. Hope I pronounced properly your name, sir. Thank you very much. We are very much proud to see here in our biggest industry meeting in the world. And we are pleased to do this event in this country in Colombo and Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is an important country for the pulse traders, and it's also a great pleasure for us. Although you had a very busy schedule and you had a speech in the parliament, and after your speech you left your parliamentary session, I think it's the 8th parliamentary session, and this was an important session for you, and you came here to support our industry. I would like to thank you very much again for your support. Without your support, this meeting wouldn't take place in this country, and in this time. Thank you very much, and welcome again. As I previously emphasized, Sri Lanka is important, especially for the lentil. Sri Lanka per capita consumption is being 6.5 to 7 kilo, is really the highest in the world. And with these numbers, if you call yourself a lentil trader, you should certainly visit Sri Lanka. And that's why I always wish to have one of our conventions in Sri Lanka during my presidency time. And this is a great opportunity for us. And I would like to also thanks to Mahmoud and Salim brothers for their support to bringing up to speed here and hospitality of the Sri Lankan people. In the world, we are passing through the difficult time in the pulse industry, and to be here in a peaceful country, and also if I compare in my last visit to Sri Lanka that I made 6 years ago, the wealth and the smell of richness is more and more in this country than before. And this happened with your leadership, sir. Thank you very much. I would like to also convey this in behalf of my industry. Wealthier countries are also, for us, easier to deal with for our industry, and as in all other industries. So thank you very much again for your visit, and I would like to thank all of you that your presence here. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we thank His Excellency Maithripala Sirisena, President of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, for his presence, and also recognize the presence of the Honourable Minister for Trade, Commerce and Industries, the Honourable Rishad Badruddin, who again joins us with His Excellency. We thank the gentleman, and now, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue with the global outlook of green pulses. May I request the panel to please take their places on the dais. This is the last and final session of the day, and as usual, questions on our app. You can see it on screen, slido.com, SLIDO, hashtag Pulses 2018. Back to the panel, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello. Yeah, I'd just like to give each one of the panelists an opportunity to respond to the information that I put up. So, Brad, would you just start it off and just give some comments, context in terms of what you're seeing from your perspective in terms of planting, weather conditions, and maybe some things on price direction?
Yeah. Okay. Greg touched on a lot of, different points as it pertains to the production and yield and acreage of this year's crop. I think in terms of weather, the verdict is still out, but we all know that we're starting with far less subsoil moisture than what we had last year. So that's going to remain a concern all the way through. In terms of acreage, planted acreage, a lot of people would wonder, with prices falling the way they have, why are we planting actually more green lentils this year than last year? But if you compare the, potential gross margin per acre that the farmer is looking at with green lentils versus all the other crop choices that he has, they're not number one, number two, or even number three like they have been for the last couple of years, but they're still in that top 5, 6 choices. So for that reason, they'll continue to plant green lentils. And of course, we all know what's happened with red lentils, so the green lentil guys will stick with their green lentils. And the other comment that Greg made relative to what's happening in the U.S. in terms of wheat and the weather and the yields and the prices of wheat, I mean, that's just another reason why the growers are looking at staying with pulses. And I think maybe the third and most important reason is that the farmers in Canada, like other parts of the world, but in Western Canada, have become very large. And, for them to plant and to harvest 10, 15, 20, 50,000 acres of cropland, they need to be able to spread out the workload. And so by planting or introducing pulses and maybe more pulses into their rotation, they have a longer time in the spring to get their crops all planted, and they have a wider period of time in the fall to get them all harvested, which allows them to actually farm more land with the same amount of equipment and the same amount of labor. So that's a benefit to them, and that's why, good price or bad price, they don't change the production as much as they normally would.
All right, thank you. So our mics are now live, Michael, so if you want to just use your... So, Michael, could you, from your perspective, what's going on in Europe, shifts in demand, how do you see the impact of Russia, Kazakhstan, and
are they, in terms of being a supplier to that end of the world? So I appreciate your comments there.
Yeah, first of all, I agree to your presentation, essentially what our Canadian office is telling us. And for everybody in the auditorium that wasn't there when we had the panel in Vancouver, this guy is the lentil guru, at least since last year, because everybody was panicking when we were sitting in Vancouver over the drought. Greg pointed out that there was enough subsoil moisture, and it got in, at least in Canada, as a decent crop. And today he pointed out that there's no subsoil moisture, so that should probably ring some bells. Now going to Europe, demand is boring, it's stable. We see Russia coming up very recently now as a supplier of lentils to the world market. If the numbers on the slide are correct, nobody knows. We can dispute about them or not, and we should look at the trend, and the trend is upside, which is certainly because Russian farmers are very much trend followers, and we've had 2 continuous years with very high prices, and of course that's been boosting the ideas of planting lentils in Russia. And it's actually a region that can produce quality lentils, and we've seen it this year. It's we're going from one extreme to the other. So we've had a very tight supply, quality issues, very high prices. Now we're coming to the opposite. We have a lot of supply, less demand, and we're having good quality. And Russia is certainly contributing to that, and I think it's also hurting the traditional exporters. But it's a lack of consistency still. I believe that Russia and the Ukraine as well will develop as more important suppliers of pulses and especially lentils to the world market. But we have a lack of consistency. You see it's been very volatile in recent years in terms of production, and it's probably a compiled number with Kazakhstan, and I really can't commend a lot of Kazakhstan. Other than I know it's even more volatile than Russia is, because production and production technologies are not really highly sophisticated yet. But we see a lot of volatility, and we also see a bigger risk pattern. If a crop in Canada fails, that's probably 20–25% less yield. If a crop in Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan fails, it could be 50% of the fields don't get harvested because yield is so marginal. So that is the risk potential, and that is certainly also the reason, or one of the reasons, Russian lentils don't play a predominant role in the European market yet. It's still mostly Canadian or US lentils that get sold because they are consistently available in a consistent quality. People don't walk on contracts. Right now the market's slow, nobody's walking on a contract where they're sold. But what if the market turns the other way, which in a year or two, it will. Yeah. So, plus, if we have weather concerns about North America, there always is a weather concern about the Russian-Ukrainian situation, because statistically, at least 2 out of 5 years have been a disaster.
Right.
So that's what I can comment.
Okay. Thanks for those comments. And just, Ron, I'd like to give you an opportunity as well. Just maybe some comments about where the current stocks are standing for U.S. green lentils, what you see going on with the planting and demand for green lentils from your perspective.
Thanks, Craig. You put the numbers up for acreage and production, and we can all debate the numbers a little bit at this point in time, but it's no doubt in the U.S. We're expecting to be down 25, maybe 30% on seeded acreage. That said, if we can return to more normal yields, we could actually see better production than we had last year. Our farmers are currently in the fields getting the seed in. They're still debating with themselves on what to actually seed. Fortunately for our producers, they have options in what they can put in the ground, and we've had producers as late as last Friday coming in and changing their ideas on as much as 4,000 acres for one of our farmers, going from one product to the other. We are later than last year getting the seed in the ground, and as the seed season has moved further into the year, many of our farmers have gravitated more towards spring wheat, hard red spring wheat. In our areas in Montana and North Dakota, we grow very high quality spring wheat. The demand's a very good price, and our farmers are very good at growing it. They're much more familiar with growing spring wheat than there are pulses. And in times like this, we've seen some of them gravitate back to it because it's something that they know. You know, all that said, it still depends on Mother Nature and what she decides to give us for moisture as we move forward. Last year at this time, we actually looked pretty good. It started getting very, very dry in Montana, and we all know what happened, and we saw the pictures up there again today. It's still dry in eastern Montana, one of our largest growing areas. They have received some moisture, but they will need to get a fair amount more to get us back to normal. So there's still a lot of questions to be answered, and we'll just have to wait and see what we actually get for a crop to try to market around the world.
Okay, thank you, Ron. So I think what we should do now is if we could put up the questions from the audience, because really we're here to respond to your questions, and so we'll get rolling here in a moment as they come up on the screen. But as everybody knows, it was, you know, there's really been a perfect storm with the high prices, good production around the world, and India coming out of being a big driver. So anyways, let's start at the top there. Do you think Canada will compete with Russia and Kazakhstan? Canadian farmers happy about today's picture? And what do they think about the future of Canadian lentils? So Brad, why don't you take a run at some of that, please?
Will Canada compete with Kazakhstan? Probably never. I think Greg mentioned that some of these farms are 300,000, 350,000 acres. So, I mean, their cost of production, you know, the way they can allocate labor and equipment is completely different than other parts of the world. But at the same token, Kazakhstan can't supply the world with lentils, with green lentils. So there are buyers that are always going to have to come to Canada. So I don't think Canada is necessarily saying we have to get our prices down $300 a ton from where they are today, or we're going to be out of business. As it stands today, you know, Kazakhstan can't sell the world. What was the second part?
It's right down here in front of us here.
Yeah, but the question's gone.
Yeah, so do you think the questions disappeared, looks like.
Yeah.
So we're competing with Ukraine, Kazakhstan farmers, and the rest of the farmers.
And you know, I think the other part of the question was, are Canadian farmers happy with the price of green lentils? Well, if you ask a farmer, they're never happy with any price at any time.
That's
true.
But
in terms of the value of green lentils today relative to the, you know, basically the gross dollars they can earn from planting green lentils today versus the other crop choices that they have, they are still okay. I mean, they're not, you know, like they were the last couple of years, but they are most definitely above the cost of production. So there's a return, there's a net return to them, which is not necessarily the case with some of the other pulse crops.
Okay, looks like we have a question here regarding grades. So we'd like to know about the grading of green lentils by Canada. Do you think that all the grades fit the actual lot? Any plan to fix this issue of buyers? So Michael, why don't you take a run at that? You import from Europe. So what do you think about the standards of Canadian green lentils matching what you're purchasing?
It's a question to me?
Yeah, go ahead, Michael. Yeah, because you are an importer and buyer.
Well, the good thing is Canada and the US does have established standards, although these are, I mean, we all know it's decades ago that they were established, and then they were slightly amended and modified. But I think it's probably one of the better working grading systems. Also, I think every buyer has had, I mean, problems with getting actual lentils and getting a grade certificate to it. A lot of it is related to submitted sample certificates. A lot of it is related to individual company self-made certification. And a lot of it is related to where is the sample exactly drawn and who is analyzing the sample. I bet if you give a sample to 3 or 4 different officers at the CGC or at SGS, and they'll come up with 3 different results, especially when quality is borderline.
Right.
So at Schlüter and Mark, we work with partners that we know and that we have confidence in, and we don't have confidence in paper. So we like to know who we're dealing with and the ability of people to handle stuff. And that's not only related to Canada, that's worldwide. And I think that's very important in the trade, to know who are you dealing with. And then you don't need to go so much to GAFTA arbitration or so.
Right.
And you don't have so many quality issues, or you get them sorted out. That's what I would commend on grading certificates.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah. Just look at from my perspective, we're processors and exporters of lentils, and what I find is important. Number one is knowing what the buyer really wants to buy. So it's important that if you want packaging quality and you want to have very low foreign material levels that are better than what is allowed in a specific standard, that's important that that is clearly communicated up front. So we've been actually doing more what we call like a spec sale. So we would take the number one and then we'd add more information to make sure it covers exactly what the buyer's needs are. So if it's lower foreign material levels, or if you want it color sorted, or if you have a maximum level of splits that you can tolerate, then those things need to be communicated early in order to prevent misunderstandings with cargo arriving. So basically, I think that what I find quite often traveling around is educating the buyers to know what can be allowed in a standard, and to make sure that if you're buying just by price, look out. I think this is the mistake that many say, okay, give me the cheapest price. Well, then expect the lower end of the grade if you're just a price buyer. Okay, so I'm going to move on here to how much is the cost of 1 ton of whole red lentils cost in US dollars for farmers today? Russian farmers said it's just $195 per ton. Can you compete with them? Well, there's also Canadian and red lentils that also grow in the United States as well. I would say that it's going to be difficult for Canadians to compete at those low levels. So the cure for low prices is low prices. So Canadian production that we're going to grow this year will remain in the bin as farmers are expecting better prices. So there's no doubt that our cost of production has gone up, land values have gone up. Just land alone, to rent land, is between $100 and $135 Canadian per acre. Labor costs are up, machinery costs are up, oil is up to over $70 a barrel today, so fuel costs are going to go up, which means our fertilizer costs are going to go up. I do believe that that it's going to be very difficult for us to compete with those kind of values. Anybody else want to comment on our competitiveness with Russia and Kazakhstan?
Well, it's the same comment as the green lentils, basically, but
yeah.
I mean, they're producing 100,000 tons or 150,000 tons when the world needs 2 million tons. So yes, they've entered the production of red lentils. Yes, so far their FOB price or their farm price is $180 or $190 a ton, but you know, if the price of wheat goes to $7 a bushel, they'll stop growing red lentils. So it's just a matter of supply and demand. Yep. And you know, if you're someone that can use their quality and you have access to that production, then I suppose those are the lentils you should use. But there are many countries in the world that can't use that quality, or that they're farther away from that production, where Canadian or US lentils will work just as well.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, I would agree to that. I think the Russian strategy is more like a hit and run, and now it's hit. And if the market stays low for too long time, it may be run as well. And plus, the weather is a big impact. The currency is a big impact. We shouldn't forget about that. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else to add, Ron?
They're more for the short term, but long term would be the U.S. and Canada will be there.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned that the pet food market. Would you give us a rough estimate of between the U.S. and Canada, what went into that market? That is a very, very good question. I haven't been tracking that number. It's in the total consumption has been going through the roof. Do you want to throw some numbers at that one, Ron?
It's for me, it's almost impossible to throw numbers at it. I mean, you know, we talk to different pet food manufacturers. on a weekly basis, but to see what they're actually buying and putting into it, it's really, really difficult to say. I don't have a good answer for that. I'm sorry.
I think one of the keys we can look at is from the 2016 crop, there was a fairly sizable carryover of very low quality red lentils, and they all disappeared. I mean, we actually had Indian buyers a few months back, 5, 6, 7 months ago, asking for low-grade red lentils at a cheap price, and we couldn't find them. So somehow, some way, those lentils disappeared, and who knows how many tons went across the border for pet food, but we've all participated in sales of Canadian lentils for the pet food industry, so even if we all just do a few cars, it's going to add up to a lot of tons.
Yeah. And fortunately for us, in some respects, the quality that we had in our growing area really didn't lend itself to going into the pet food industry.
Yeah. So it's really important that I think that if we have an established alternative market like that, so if you have a lower quality crop, pet food demand will be there to underpin the value. I think it's also important to know that we're also splitting lentils now, and it's going into value-add markets. So demand around the world is going up for split lentils, whether it be red or basically a green lentil split is a yellow split. So we're seeing good uptake of lower quality green lentils as in this, and being a green lentil panel, we're seeing a lot of lentils going there. But I would throw out a number of 200,000 to 300,000 tons. So next question is, there's a buyer here who, when is the best time to buy green lentils in terms of availability and price? And would that be July, August, or September? Okay, well.
I told you to bring your crystal ball.
Okay. Well, in terms of time, I just want to take a run at that. Look, as far as I'm concerned, we're at or near the bottom. Around our office, I've been saying that May is a pivot month, and that we're going to see a turnaround in May. I think that's coming true, and it's being driven by weather. I often talk about the wall of worry, which drives the values of green lentils up. And at the moment, I would say that we have a couple steps up the wall of worry. Timing of the seeding, the lack of subsoil moisture, these are starting to create questions in terms of our ability to keep and sustain these lower values. So best time, right now you have known quality and you have some of the cheapest priced lentils. So if you like the quality we have right now, which is a very good 2 or better, and some number ones that mixed in there, this is a good time to buy. And if you want new crop, well, of course, you can probably start talking to exporters from Canada or United States to buy fresh green lentils, of course. Some markets are really like that really bright, fresh green. So Mexico, Morocco, Spain, Greece, they're really like green color. So all through Europe, that's very important. All through the West Coast, South America, color is very important. So, we don't have the best of color this last year because it was very hot and dry at harvest time. So I'd like to get some other comments in terms of timing and pricing, and maybe start down there with you, Ron, then.
Well, and so much of it depends on the year. I mean, last year, earlier in the season, when we thought we were going to have a big crop, I know ourselves, we were more aggressive in selling new crop, and we really slowed up as we were watching the weather and saw it, starting to drought out. This year, we're a little bit snake bit from last year, and we're maybe asking a little bit more of a premium just because we're not sure exactly what's going to happen. But as we get through the year, if the moisture does come in, we see we're going to have a crop, then we'll be more aggressive. So a lot of it just depends on the year.
Yeah, I guess the attempt to catch the very low end of the market usually fails. Huh? So I think one should value a crop against where has it been historically, what are production costs, what other bad things can happen to the demand side of the market. And I believe we're close to seeing the low end. We could go lower. There's a lot of influencing factors, and currency is one
right.
that we haven't touched yet. As a German company, I look more at the euro. I think the euro is up against the dollar, still over 10% from last year. The Russian ruble is down 20%, so we see that as a lot of impact, and it could change with crude oil prices. I think if something's reasonably priced and there's an existing business behind it, cover it in. I mean, we're not at $1,500 lentils right now.
Exactly. Yeah, so the next question is about the India has high duties and demand is low. So how many tons of red lentils and green lentils are going to be carried out for the new season? So, well, we know that there's a good carry out globally. I'll take a run at Canada. There's red lentils, 500,000 tons of red, so we have good supply there. In terms of large green lentils, 70,000 tons, 60,000 tons. Richly sized, non-existent to speak of. A few hundred tons, maybe 1,000 tons laying around in Canadian bins is very, very low supply. And in terms of Estons, 20,000 ton, you know, really good two, low number one color. So that's what we have on the Canadian side. Just go down the line here. Why don't you guys give some figures for the U.S. and what you see maybe in Kazakhstan and, you know, potential carryovers. You want to start, Ron?
Sure. As far as red lentil carryover for us is almost zero. We have virtually none. As far as the green lentils, you say maybe 150,000 tons, something like that in our area.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Michael, on?
Again, the crystal ball. Yeah, I can only guess this. There's going to be a couple of 10,000 tons of green lentils likely left in Kazakhstan and Russia, of all types of quality. But yeah, production this year was certainly higher than what you could market. It could be a totally different story this year. I mean, if we're talking about, I'm just throwing in a number, maybe 30 to 50,000 tons of available stocks, which it could be, but doesn't necessarily have to be. Does it really anything do to the big supply-demand side? No.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, there's going to be a carryover.
Okay. Brad, your thoughts on carryovers around the world?
Yeah, I mean, you know, looking at Canada, I think the demand has been brisk enough all year long, and the values to the growers have been good relative to other pulse crops that I think they have marketed a lot of their green lentils. So I don't think the carryover of green lentils is going to be as a percentage of production or in terms of other years. I don't think it's going to be a lot different. And I think that's why we're seeing, you know, a trend to the same acreage or maybe even more acreage this year coming, is that the growers are not necessarily worried about having bins full of green lentils sitting on their farm and wondering what they're going to do with them. I think a lot of them have already marketed them.
Yeah.
And one thing, too, with our farmers, they have the ability to hold their product. They don't have to market it every year. They can take it from year to year. So if they don't like the price, they'll hold on to it. So maybe we see in our areas the farmers more willing to hold on to their product.
Okay. Thanks, gentlemen. Next question has to do with, okay, we just had a change in priority here, okay? So what will happen to Canadian lentils in the EU if the glyphosate law will be reviewed, and why not taking steps now to prevent it? So I think this is a good question for you, Michael. Maybe give us your perspective on MRLs and glyphosate.
Yeah, okay, it's a good question actually, and it's an important question because GPC is working very much towards being active in the MRL part of things and getting MRLs harmonized and also based on scientific knowledge. So there's probably a bit of a misunderstanding. The glyphosate usage in the EU has been extended for 5 years. It's a highly political issue. Was supposed to be extended for 10 years, and because there's a lot of opposition against it, it was only extended by 5 years, I believe until 2022. That concerns the use of glyphosate as a crop protection agent in the EU. It does not concern necessarily the MRLs. The MRLs are going to be reviewed, and they may be lowered, yes, but the MRL for lentils is 10. The typical content of glyphosate we see coming in from Canada and the US is around 2. And we have a Codex MRL, I believe, at 5. And my thinking is it would be very difficult for the EU to remove the MRL for lentils completely. So there are, there's Diaquat, for example. There are other agents that can do the same in desiccation that you don't necessarily need glyphosate. It may be something in the EU, you never know, probably coming more from the retailer side, requesting lower MRLs. But I don't see it as an issue coming up right now from the very legal side of the EU.
Okay.
So, but anyways, it's something to watch, and we have a committee in GPC,
right.
And everybody that has, it's not green lentils now, it's the MRL committee, everybody that has to contribute something to that is highly welcome.
Okay, Brad, do you have any comments about the use of glyphosate on lentils from your perspective?
I agree with Michael. I mean, there were products before glyphosate came along, and then it became popular. And you know, the minute that the herbicide companies start to hear about the potential for glyphosate not being used as a desiccant, they'll come up with something else, and it'll probably have an application rate of 10% of what we're using today, or something like that, because they're all, everyone in that side of the business is driven towards less pesticide residue. So I think if we have 5 years, I think the problem will start to fix itself.
Okay. Ron?
I mean, the market will drive the direction, and if the consumers are saying that it's something that they don't want or they can't have, then the producers will react and the chemical companies will react as well.
Okay. Next question is, what is the premium received of green over red? Well, right now, roughly on a SIF value basis, greens are running in the, say a 2 at $620 to $675 a ton, and currently right now reds are trading down, in the low 400 range. So there's a couple $100 to $250 a ton difference right now. Again, red lentil prices, from my perspective, are at a price that is not going to encourage production long term, especially if the farmers have low price and a low yield. It'll be very challenging for the trade to purchase red lentils from growers in Canada. And I'd like to get your views down the line here, Brad. Any thoughts on this disparity or price premium of green over red?
Yeah, I mean, the market is the market. There's too many reds, there's not too many greens. That's bad grammar, but anyway. So the spread is wide. I mean, we're paying the grower 17 or 18 cents a pound to grow red lentils, or for red lentils in storage, and we would still pay 24 cents or 25 cents maybe for green lentils. That's maybe a wider spread than normal, but the market is the market, and maybe there'll be more green lentils and less red lentils, and that premium, that spread will come closer together. The spread is there because it's easier to grow red lentils than it is green lentils. They yield more consistently. The quality is more consistent. They're traded on a number 2 or better. They don't have to always be a number 1. So the spread will always be there.
Right.
It's just that premium itself just moves a little bit from time to time.
Okay. All right, maybe we'll just jump to the next question then about Canadian quality. It's basically the question is why Canadian quality every year, results every year are different. I mean, layered number 2 quality, will you send, okay, I'm having a hard reading this one here. You send under the name of number 1 another season. So do you have a fix for this table? From my perspective as an exporter, we're consistent with our quality. Changes from year to year. In a Canadian standard, we have a chart that shows the minimum color range for a number 1 green. So we definitely, because of the hot dry last year, we had lower color. The green was at the lower end of the range. So a 1 is a 1 in terms of color. It does have some room to move. If you want a specific color, then we can actually send that pictures or send a sample. If you want a type sample, we can sell by that. In terms of damages, those things are consistent splits for number 1. There's a maximum tolerance, and so for packaging quality, people want 1 to 1.25%. Some want even less than that. Number 2's a couple 3% maximum. So I think it's pretty consistent from our perspective, and I'd like to get some other comments. Do you have anything else to say, fellas, about quality? And
I mean, just as you say, Greg, the color will vary from year to year, and at harvest, the damage and the peel split and broken will vary from year to year, but those are all grading factors. So if we have a year of higher values, higher damage, higher peel split and broken, then more of the crop will fall into a lower grade. That's how the system works.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we shouldn't forget it's a natural product. I get the question being an importer in Europe, but we're also originators in Canada, so we see both sides of the coin. And I think it's one of the interesting things in this business that you're dealing with a product that's grown on a field naturally. It's not coming off a 3D printer, so it has to be different every year. And I think it has always been the understanding of the Canadian Grain Commission as well, that every year is different. There's reference samples, and you cannot manufacture quality to a certain extent. I mean, you can do a cleaning job very well, but you can't paint lentils.
No.
I guess that would be an MRL issue at the end.
Yes.
So you have to essentially take what's there, and you have to also appreciate there's a lot of regions in the world where the farmers are doing a perfect job.
Yeah.
If you look at Canada, the University of Saskatoon has put so much effort into developing the right crop varieties, and it's in the years with surplus, that's the questions coming up. In the years with deficits, the questions coming up: how do we nourish the world?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the bigger challenge.
Ron, any comments about quality? I guess it's more of a Canadian question they're asking, but I think basically in the U.S., as far as your quality and green lentils down there, I understand you do have an FAQ quality meeting, and there's some degree of flexibility, but there's got to be a line that you draw for color for your U.S. green lentils.
There is an FAQ, okay, but it still goes off of the grade standard, if you will. We'll try to market that or sell that, because some of our customers that like to have that color quality, if you will, but we always get in the argument with our producers, well, it's grade 1.
Right.
So it gets really difficult.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay, so roughly how many tons of USA green lentils were reported to or exported to China in 2017?
Just a few thousand tons, to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah, so it's pretty small.
Very, very, very small.
And from the Canadian perspective, it's very small. There's a few tons of small caliber Chinese estins that come into Europe for canning purposes.
We are getting more and more interest, but it's not translated into trades.
Be wonderful if we could take this Pulse initiative to over 1 billion people in China and have them enjoy lentils. It would be a transformative new demand. So financially, how long can those large stocks be held? Well, low interest rates make it pretty cheap to hold. I think that's what farmers are betting on right now. We're at 3.5% at the bank, and I think farmers are banking on a 10% increase in prices, so it's pretty good return on investment. From their perspective, red lentils stay in the bin for years. As far as I've bought lentils as old as 2016, 2015. It's amazing how long some of these lentils can stay in the bin. Green lentils surely turn brown, but they can be used for other purposes. Thoughts down the line? Ron, do you want to start? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's so farmer specific. It's so specific to each individual producer, what other crops they're growing, how their production is in those crops, how the markets are for those crops. Like I said, for our farmers, they have the ability to hold some product, so they can make those decisions.
Yeah.
You're a farmer too, and you know farmers are cash rich in Canada. So,
yeah.
So I think you can hold on to them for a long time. And just to combine it with the other question, what does the quality do? If you hold on them as a farmer for enough time and you sell them in a rising market or in a tight market, nobody's looking at your color anymore.
Yeah.
So a little bit of brownish color doesn't matter. It's the supply that has to be there. So it gets an asset to farmers, and we see that on a lot of the special crops.
Yeah. I think it's important to realize that, I remember in 2013 we had a huge crop of green lentils, and subsequently in 2014 we had a lot of rain, and suddenly, the 2013 lentils that were old crop were better quality than what was being produced, and suddenly they went up in value very rapidly. So that's what I think what farmers are betting on. So we're down to our last minute. So are farmers aware of what's going on in terms of supply, demand, political issues, and pricing? So start with you, Brad. How do you see farmers and their awareness now?
Well, the world is very small. I mean, the farmers have access to all the same information that we do, plus a lot of them either hire or follow or subscribe to these brokers or market newsletter writers that we have in Canada. So I would say, you know, minute to minute, they know what's happening in the world. I mean, you will hear announcement of a duty increase or a new duty in India, and within 5 minutes on Twitter, the farmer-to-farmer discussion has already begun. What's this going to do to price? Did you see this? Did you see that? So I think they're very aware of everything that's happening in the world almost as quickly as we are in the industry.
Michael?
I would totally agree. Even for Russia and Kazakhstan, it's information is running quicker than anything else. It's at the speed of light. And yes, guys are well informed. There's nobody really dumb.
Yeah. Ron?
Yeah, I mean, it's in this day and age with technology, our producers are very much aware of what's going on. I think sometimes quicker than we are. But we also, you know, view our producer partners as partners, and we share with them what we're seeing. So not only they viewing it and analyzing it for themselves, we also try to share with them what we're seeing and what we think will happen, not just a month out, but a year out. So we're trying to make sure that they see those things as well.
Okay. Well, thanks, gentlemen. Looks like we are out of time, and so I'll turn this back over to the GPC. And thanks, everybody, for your attention and questions, and hopefully we answered them. And have a great, enjoy the rest of the day and the convention.
Thank you. Once again, an excellent panel. I'd like to request the panel to please give us a memento photograph right here in front. Gentlemen, a photograph of the panel right in front here, together. Apologies. The Global Green Lentils Outlook, just concluding, a couple of announcements before we wind up for the day. Our photographer is here. Very quickly, take this photograph for this panel. Thank you, Mr. Simpson, Mr. Ford, Mr. Kempadink, and Williams. This session has been sponsored by Seaboard, as you can see on the stage or have seen through the presentations. This is the concluding presentation of the day. Just to remind you that tomorrow the registrations, for those of you missed out, start at 9:30 in the morning. And the first session will start thereafter. You have the schedule with you, but you don't want to miss the first session because it's going to be all about GPC Young Professionals update. After that, we will focus on beans, lentils, peas, and chickpeas, and of course, we wind up tomorrow with the gala closing reception. So look forward to a packed day tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. For now, it's time to say goodbye. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Thank you.